Happy Mother's Day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I am your host, Tiffany Daniels. I hope everyone has had a great time with their moms today or their loved ones. This is coming out a little bit later today because my mom doesn't believe in the term noon. She believes in noon-ish. So, we are going back to the Judge Rotenberg Center. And, folks, today I'm going to give you an outline, an idea of just how long this has been going on, give you a little bit of a good background before we start going into the court documents, the other side of the argument, what have you. So, let's go ahead and get started. I don't want to keep you all. I know some of you may have some, activities planned, so let's kind of shoot through this here. The Judge Rotenberg Center, JRC, was founded in 1971 as the Behavioral Research Institute. Is an institution and school in Canton, Massachusetts, United States, for people with developmental disabilities, emotional disorders, and autistic behaviors. The center has been condemned for torture by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture. The JRC is known for its Graduated Electronic Defibrillator, or GED, a device that administers electric shocks to residents through a remote control. The device was designed by Matthew Israel, the Institute's founder. While the FDA issued a formal ban on the GED in 2020, the device continues to be used on some residents pending an administrative stay for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is why I'm fighting it. And they're appealing the ban, so I gotta do my due diligence. Breathe. I'm sorry, folks. I've been fighting those suckers for so long. It's exhausting, but it must be done. Anyways, the Judge Rotenberg Center's Behavior Modification Program uses methods of applied behavior analysis and relies heavily on aversive therapy. Aversives used by the JRC include contingent food programs, food deprivation, long-term restraints, sensory deprivation, and GED shocks. While the JRC claims to rely mainly on positive behavioral support and contends that aversives are only used as a last resort when positive intervention has failed, multiple state reports have found that the aversives are used for minor infractions and that no significant positive behavior support programs exist. In a video that surfaced in 2011, the JRC staff tied an autistic boy face down to a 4-point board and shocked him 31 times at the highest amperage setting. The first shock was given for failing to take off his coat when asked, and the remaining 30 shocks were given for screaming and tensing up while being shocked. The boy was later hospitalized with third-degree burns and acute stress disorder, but no action was taken against any staff as neither the law nor JRC policy had been broken. This is sick. In a separate incident, 2 residents were awoken from their beds at night, restrained and shocked 77 and 29 times respectively, on the false allegation that they had misbehaved. The center's founder, Matthew Israel, was indicted on criminal charges for ordering a video of the incident destroyed and was forced to resign for his position at the JRC as part of a plea deal to avoid prosecution. Coward. There have been repeated attempts to shut down the center by autism rights advocates, disability rights advocates, and human rights advocates. Notable people who have opposed the center include Ari Neiman, Shane Neumar, Lydia Brown, and Brian Joyce. Excuse me. Organizations that oppose the center include the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, Disability Rights International, and the Community Alliance for Ethical Treatment of Youth. 6 residents have died at the institute since it was founded in 1971. This is going to be a bit of a long video, so please bear with me. 1971 Founding and Early Years. In 1971, Matthew Israel founded the center as the Behavioral Research Institute in Providence, Rhode Island. Initially, it had just 2 residents, one autistic and the other schizophrenic. In 1975, the BRI expanded to include group homes in Massachusetts. In 1976, it opened another branch in California. Israel opened the California branch of the BRI without a license to operate a group home, without a license to practice psychology in the state of California, and without a license to use aversives. The Institute used aversives on residents there nonetheless. When the Institute applied for a license to operate in 1977, the California Department of Health rejected the application, citing the lack of meaningful peer review and unnecessary use of painful aversives. The department also found that there was insufficient evidence to show that Israel was reputable and responsible, and that he had the ability to comply with regulations. Without the license, the center was scheduled to shut down. The day after the scheduled shutdown, a group of parents reopened the institute as a co-op, moving Israel's official position of executive director to consultant. The organization then changed its name to the Behavioral Research Institute of California and applied for a license to operate a group home and permit to use of aversives. With the aid of the then California Governor Pat Brown, whose law firm was hired to represent the center, they received the license to operate, as well as the only permit ever granted by the state of California for a group home to use physical aversive on its residents. The institute was awarded $35,000 a year per child by the state, the highest rate of any community facility in California. In 1981, death of a resident, California launched an investigation into the institute and its practices. The investigation revealed various abuses against the residents, both physical and psychological. Residents were beaten, restrained, humiliated, and not adequately fed or cared for. Residents often bore extreme bruising, which the staff had been trained to conceal from doctors and family members. As a result of the investigation, the institute was banned from using physical aversives, as well as from using restraints and withholding meals as punishment. Additionally, Matthew Israel was banned from entering the facility. Judy Weber, the mother of one of the institute's residents who would go on to become Israel's second wife, took over the operation of the center and later named it as Tobin World. The center denied all allegations made by the state report. It looks horrible, but because you're accused of something does not make these things happen. Judy Weber, Israel. 1981 to 1994, BRI in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. As early as 1979, the authorities in New York State had published 2 reports on the Behavioral Research Institute, in which signs of physical and mental abuse were documented. One report found that the Institute's methods were only effective through the means of coercion, and that the residents relapsed into their old behavior as soon as the immediate threat of a punishment was gone. While corporal punishment was against the law in Massachusetts, the Institute was granted special permission to use aversives in 1983. The Institute was welcomed by some of the state officials due to its near-zero rejection rate. In 1993, the Massachusetts Department of Mental Retardation said that the school had repeatedly failed to comply with a number of state regulations and threatened to take away its certification. In 1994, the center changed its name to the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center to honor the memory of the judge who helped preserve the program from extinction at the hands of the state licensing officials in the 1980s. JRC moved from its original location near Providence, Rhode Island, to its current facilities in Canton, Massachusetts in 1996. In 2011, Israel was forced to resign from his position as director of the Judge Rotenberg Center as part of a deferred prosecution agreement after being indicted on criminal charges related to the abuse of residents. 6 residents have died of preventable causes at the center since it opened in 1971. As a result of the 2011 ruling by the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care, Governor Deval Patrick's administration imposed regulations that only residents whose treatment plans approved the GED before that time were still permitted to receive it. But new residents enrolled into the JRC were no longer allowed by law to receive the GED as part of their plan. The Massachusetts Department of Developmental Services is responsible for providing the JRC with its license to use aversives, including electric shocks. Behavioral modification. The Judge Rotenberg Center provides behavioral treatment using the methodologies of ABA. JRC's behavior modification program relies heavily on aversive therapy, with treatment directly exclusively towards promoting normalization. Making us like neurotypicals, not letting us be ourselves. You see where we're getting. It's very, very similar to gay conversion therapy. In fact, the same guy who came up with ABA is the same guy who came up with gay conversion camps. Just a little tidbit I thought I'd throw in. Aversives are used to modify behavior, including food deprivation, restraint, solitary confinement, and GED shocks. While the center often claims that it uses aversives only as a last resort against self-harm and aggression, these claims have been refuted. Reports by multiple government agencies have found that the center regularly uses aversives on children with no history of self-harm or aggression, often for minor infractions. Several former residents of the center who used to be on GED have successfully transitioned to positive behavioral support programs elsewhere. There is a medical consensus that positively only support is both safer and more effective than the use of aversives. Aversives. Contingent skin shocks. The center has stated that the GED was only used as a last resort to prevent violent or self-injurious behavior when positive behavioral support had failed. However, a 2006 report by the New York State Education Department found that the device was regularly used when there was no threat of serious physical harm or injury, including for failing to be neat, wrapping one's foot around the leg of a chair, stopping work for more than 10 seconds, closing one's eyes for more than 5 seconds, minor acts of noncompliance. Other reported reasons for administering the shocks included using the bathroom without permission, urinating on oneself after being refused the right to use the bathroom, screaming while being shocked, attempting to remove the GED. The report also found that despite the center's claims, no significant positive behavioral support program existed. Additionally, the report found that the GED would be programmed to give automated skin shocks in response to targeted behaviors. For example, some residents were made to sit on GED seats that would automatically administer skin shocks for the target behavior of standing up, while others wore waist holsters that would administer skin shocks if the resident pulled a hand out of the holster. Shocks were administered continuously until the target behavior stopped occurring. The center did not have approval from the United States Food and Drug Administration to use the device in this way. An FDA investigation found that some parents and guardians were pressured into giving consent to put their child on the GED, that they were not provided with accurate information about the device's risks, and other options were not exhausted before resorting to the GED. The agency also found that the GED could cause both physical and psychological harm, including pain, burns, tissue damage, depression, fear, and aggression. Furthermore, they concluded that the GED device may have caused one of the residents to enter a catatonic state, and that it can, in some cases, worsen the behaviors that it claims to treat. Greg Miller, a former teacher's assistant at the JRC, reported that the staff were expected to administer shocks without consideration for the circumstances in which it occurred. Staff monitored by cameras and feared losing their jobs if they refused to deliver the expected shocks. There were no expectations, he said. We had to follow court-approved orders. Residents were made to wear the GED devices at all hours, even during showers and sleep. Residents report that they were sometimes awoken by shocks in the night, which were administered for reasons including nighttime incontinence, tensing up while asleep, and having broken a rule earlier in the day. Residents would be shocked if they would fail to stay awake at daytime. One resident reported after being shocked while asleep, staff would not explain to her why she was shocked. After the incident, the fear of being shocked in her sleep produced extreme insomnia. It was not explained to me why I got this shock. I was terrified and angry. I was crying. I kept asking why, and they kept telling me no talking out. After this incident, I really stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, they would jump open, anticipating that jolt somewhere in my body. And that is from an anonymous former resident. Wilhelm Pelham, a behavioral specialist and director for Center for Children and Families at the University of New York at Buffalo, argued that the center's use of electric shocks was harmful and unnecessary. People don't use shock anymore because they don't need to. It is not the standard of care. There are alternative procedures that do not involve aversive like electric shock. At the time, the JRC was the only institution in the United States using electric skin shocks as aversives. Contingent Food Program. In contingent food programs, a resident's food is withheld to be used as a reward for good behavior. Oh my God. Oh my. Let me read that again to you. Let me read that again. In a contingent food program, a resident's food is withheld to be used as a reward for good behavior. So eating your breakfast, lunch, dinner was something you had to earn? Okay, moving on. If a resident fails to meet all the goals laid out for them by the JRC each meal, they are made to discard the excess food not earned. Oh my God. If a resident fails to meet their daily minimum calorie intake, which may be as little as 20% of their prescribed calories, non-preferred makeup food is dispensed to bring them up to the minimum. The non-preferred makeup food is designed to be noxious so as to punish the resident. For example, it may be mushed up and sprinkled with liver powder. A 2006 investigation of the JRC concluded that the contingent food program posed unnecessary risk to the residents' growth and development. Sensory deprivation. A common sensory deprivation punishment involves forcing a resident to wear a helmet that restricts vision and hearing through the use of white noise for an extended period of time. The resident may also be restrained and subjected to other aversive during this time. In 1981, a resident died of asphyxiation during this procedure. The punishment continues to be used. What the hell? Okay. At least one resident was subjected to a procedure called isolation deprivation, in which he is restrained by the wrists and ankles for 24 hours and boxes were stacked so as to prevent him from seeing anything in the room. During this time, he received only lettuce with mayonnaise to eat. On several occasions, he was not allowed to use the bathroom and was forced to soil his pants. Furthermore, staff directed to pinch his feet once an hour and spray him with water whenever they walked by. Movement limitation. The use of long-term restraints is common at the JRC. Many residents are required to carry their own restraint badge, which contain materials required to restrain them. Commonly used restraints include the 4-point board and the 5-point restraint chair. Residents may be used alone or in combination with other adversives to hurt residents. For example, one resident's behavior plan specified that he was to receive 5 GED shocks while restrained to a 4-point board as a consequence for pulling a fire alarm. See that? This is the artwork of one of the residents. Behavioral rehearsal lessons. In a behavioral rehearsal lesson, a resident is provoked, tricked, or coerced into exhibiting a target behavior, eating non-food items, destruction of property, so that the target behavior may be punished. If the resident refuses to perform the target behavior, they are punished for non-compliance. But if they perform the target behavior, then they are punished much more harshly for breaking the rules. There is no way for the resident to escape punishment. The resident is repeatedly challenged to perform the behavior, and the lesson does not end until they sit perfectly still for 10 minutes. The JRC contends that behavior rehearsal lessons are an effective way of reducing high-risk, low-frequency behaviors. Are they out of their mind? As of 2006, at least 9 residents at the JRC were approved for behavior rehearsal lessons. This is psychotic! This is psychotic! In addition to punishments, residents of the center are given the opportunity to earn rewards. State reports have found that despite the institution's claims, its rewards programs are minimal. Things considered rewards at the JRC may include verbal praise, the opportunity to look out a window. What? And sometimes, just sometimes. A child who cries is not even to be given attention, as this is considered a reward, and the child may be punished for crying. One reward that a resident may win is the opportunity to visit the Big Reward Store. The Big Reward Store contains a pool table and various arcade games, and is the only place in the center that residents may socialize freely. We had to wait until we were in the BRS to communicate with others. That was the only time you really laughed, had fun, hung around with your friends, because usually you can't talk to them. Isabel Cedeno, former student. In its 2006 private special educational school program Revenue of Findings, the Massachusetts Department of Education found that unsigned individual educational programs, IEPs, were being utilized for the residents at the JRC, and that the center did not have a written policy indicating that it must obtain consent before revising or changing an IEP. At various points in its history, the investigations and lawsuits have been brought against the center's operations. Matthew Israel has cited Ivar Lova's use of a cattle prod on autistic children as justification on the center's use of electric skin shots. Okay. Let me read that again. Matthew Israel has cited Ivar Lova's use of a cattle prod on autistic children as justification for the center's use of electric skin shocks. Let that sink in a minute. 1979 report. A 1979 report from the state of New York found that, rather than being a program of neglect which harms children by not assisting them in growth, the Institute's program utilizes a current professional ideology to deny children the opportunity to grow, to deny them any choices, to deny them developmental experiences and decision making, to deny them normal experiences and leisure time pursuits, to deny them any opportunities for fun, to deny them any opportunity to demonstrate anything other than a few pre-selected responses. 1979 New York State Report. As a result of the report, the state of New York restricted the Institute's right to use adversives to cases where a resident was in a danger to himself or others, and even then only after other means had failed. However, the Institute soon regained its right to use adversives on New York residents. 1982 Report. In 1979, a staff member reassigned and asked for the district attorney to file child abuse charges against the Institute, alleging that he had observed of various former staff, residents, and concerned family members. The California Department of Social Services launched an investigation into the institution. The ensuing investigation revealed various abuses by the Institute, including improper and unsafe use of restraints, punishments designed to humiliate residents, failure to provide proper nutrition, failure to provide proper medical care, and severe bruising, laceration, and scars from adversive interventions. In 1982 report of the investigation, the California Department of Social Services documented various violations and abuses that had occurred at the Institute. As a result of the investigation, the state of California revoked the Institute's license to use adversives and forbade Matthew Israel from setting foot on the property. Physical abuse. The investigation found that residents received excessive bruises from excessive and unnecessary adversives. Residents had cuts, scars, scabs, and open wounds from use of adversives. Furthermore, staff took action to disguise these injuries from doctors and family members. Doctors' appointments were sometimes postponed due to the presence of excessive bruising, and aversive interventions were put on hold before scheduled visits with family for public relations purposes. This is sick. Residents were made to wear long sleeves to cover up the injuries, and social service employees were on the occasions denied the right to adequately inspect them for bruises. Residents were often put in positions where there was no way for them to avoid receiving an aversive. For example, deaf children were punished for failing to comply with verbal commands. Residents were also found to take part in behavioral rehearsal lessons, where they were punished regardless of whether or not they had behaved correctly. Additionally, residents were regularly spanked for crying in response to punishment. The report found that at least one resident's behavior substantially worsened at the Institute due to improper treatment and unprofessional use of aversives. Humiliation. The report found that staff pinched residents to make them repeat phrases uttered by staff, and threatened residents with use of the aversives if they did not comply with the staff's arbitrary commands. One resident was made to eat dinner outside with his arms restrained by his sides from a plate of food had been placed on the ground. Other residents were deprived of their right to sleep in a bed. One was forced to sleep in a kneeling position while tied to a piece of furniture, while another was made to sleep on the floor with his arms restrained by nearby fixtures. Residents were sometimes made to soil themselves when the staff refused the use of the bathroom. Restraints. Residents were restrained for punishment as well as for personal convenience of the staff. Residents were restrained in unsafe ways and sometimes received cuts and bruises. In 1981, a 14-year-old boy died at the Institute while restrained face down to the 4-point board. Oh my God. The Institute was not authorized to use restraints on any resident at this time and continued to do so even after being informed that it was against the law. Record keeping and retaliation. The Institute was found to have removed records, making them inaccessible to investigators and family. Furthermore, they were found to have denied the right to view records to family members and investigators. In many cases, the Institute's records were inaccurate. Examples include denying a resident food as punishment while recording that he had been fed, recording that restraints had been checked when they had not been checked, and failing to properly record administration of adversives. The Institute retaliated against people who complained about their practices and refused to let the Department of Social Services investigate those complaints. Parents were told that their children would be expelled if they questioned or complained about the Institute. Before and after the video. The investigation found that residents were provoked into violent and aggressive behavior as part of the filming of a before and after video, where they staged clips of residents responding to provocation were shown as examples of how they had behaved before treatment. The residents were then taken off adversive therapy, rewarded heavily for several days, and asked to perform only tasks that placed little demand on them, so that a video could be produced to show how they behaved after treatment. This film is often shown to parents of prospective residents and to reporters to convince them of the benefits of the Institute. This is what we know about. We're going to just shoot through it real quick. In 2002, an autistic teenager from New York City named Andre McCollins was restrained on a 4-point board and shocked over 31 times over the course of 7 hours. The first shock was given after he did not take off his coat when asked. Subsequent squats were given as punishment for screaming and tensing up while being shocked. In the video, McCollins can be heard shouting, "Someone help me, please." The JRCs listed this as a major disruptive behavior, for which he was administered a GED shock. The day after the incident, McCollins' mother had to drive him to the hospital, as he was unable to speak and had burns on many parts of his body. The doctor diagnosed him with acute stress disorder, which is a direct result of the center's aversives. His mother subsequently claimed that there is no counseling for the residents there, and the staff lied to her all these years. In 2012, a video of the incident was released as part of a lawsuit by McCollins' mother, which was settled for an undisclosed sum. The video aired on national news and caught the attention of the hacker group Anonymous, which announced in a YouTube video that the sender and those affiliated with it were targets. Anonymous hacked the JRC's website, retrieved confidential information about individuals and groups associated with it, and posted that information to Pastebin. The doxed information included the names and addresses of the center sponsors, lobbyists, lawyers, supporters, and founder. Hoax phone call. After the center received a phone call alleging that 2 residents had misbehaved earlier that evening, staff woke them up from their beds, restrained them, repeatedly gave them electric shocks. One of the residents received 77 shocks, and the other received 29. After the incident, one of the residents had to be treated for burns. The phone call was later found to be a hoax perpetrated by a former resident who was pretending to be a supervisor. In December 2007, the center was found by the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care to have been abusive towards the residents and had failed to protect their health. The incident led to 2 investigations, one by the federal government and one by the state of Massachusetts. While the investigation was ongoing, Matthew Israel ordered the tapes destroyed despite of a court order to keep them. In May 2011, Israel was indicted on several charges of child endangerment, acting as an accessory after the fact, and obstruction of justice for misleading a grand jury over the JRC's destruction of tapes. In 2011, Israel was forced to resign from his position at JRC in a deferred prosecution plea deal with the Massachusetts State Attorney General's office. These are the students who passed away. Danny Oswald was a 14-year-old autistic boy who lived at JRC, then called the Behavioral Research Institute, in 1981, while restrained face down to a bed. The institute was not authorized to use restraints on its residents at that time, and Oswald had previously had a rod surgically implanted in his back to replace a degenerative back disease that had resulted from his treatment there. The coroner's report concluded that Oswald had died of MR and cerebral malformation and recorded his death as natural causes. Vincent Militek. Vincent Militek was a 22-year-old autistic man who died at the Institute in 1985. He had been restrained and forced to wear a white noise-emitting sensory deprivation helmet, and he died of asphyxiation after suffering an epileptic seizure. Militek had a history of epileptic seizures and been made to wear the helmet as punishment for making inappropriate sounds. The judge presiding over a hearing on Militek's death declared that the two staff doctors were negligent in approving the therapy, and that the center's director, Matthew Israel, had been negligent in authorizing the helmet's use. Militek's mother said that she did not want charges pressed against the institute, but she did sue the JRC for $10 million. Abigail Gibson was a 29-year-old woman with a seizure disorder who was detained at the Behavioral Research Institute and subject to regular physical aversives by the program there. She suffered a heart attack in her room at night and died 2 days later at the Sturdy Memorial Hospital in 1987. Linda Corneliuson was a 19-year-old nonverbal and intellectually disabled resident of the Institute who died in 1990 of complications related to gastric perforation. At the time of her death, Corneliuson was on a contingent food program where food was withheld as punishment for undesired behavior. In the days leading up to her death, Corneliuson's expressions of pain were interpreted as misbehavior by the staff, who administered 56 physical aversive over 5 hours before calling an ambulance. Corneliuson was unconscious when the ambulance arrived. An investigation of Corneliuson's death conducted by the Massachusetts Department of Mental Retardation reported that the treatment was inhumane beyond all reason and violated universal standards of human decency, but failed to find enough evidence to link the JRC to Corneliuson's death. However, a Massachusetts court found in 1995 that the JRC exhibited negligence. At the time of her death, Corneliuson had been a resident of the Institute for 7 years and had been subjected to 88,719 aversives. Oh my God. What is this? Silverio Gonzalez was a disabled 16-year-old who died in the Institute's custody in 1998. He was housed there for 11 months before making an attempt to free himself by jumping from a transport bus. He died from head trauma from the fall. His mother, Olga Zapata, sued the center after his death. Opposition, condemnation for torture. In 2010, the American human rights organization Disability Rights International filed an appeal with the Office of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, stating they believed the residents were being subjected to human rights abuses due to the center's use of aversives. The then Special Rapporteur Manfred Noreck sent what he described as an urgent appeal to the U.S. government asking them to investigate. In 2013, the Special Rapporteur declared that the use of the GED device violated the United Nations Convention Against Torture. FDA bans GED. In 2014, the United States Food and Drug Administration announced a public hearing where a panel of neurological devices experts would consider whether or not the FDA should issue a ban of electric shock aversives conditioning devices like the GED. In April 2016, the Food and Drug Administration took the further step of formally proposing a regulatory ban on electric shock aversives conditioning devices. In 2020, the FDA issued the final rule banning the device with only minor changes from the 2016 draft. The GED was the third medical device ever banned by the FDA in the organization's history. However, the FDA issued an administrative stay in March 2020 that allowed the center to continue using shock on individuals who would need a physician-directed plan indefinitely. Oh my God. Pending the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, which limited physician contact with many residents. Bastards. Bastards. What the hell, FDA? The hell's your problem? Moving on. Sorry. Ugh. Attempts to close down the center. Soon after the death of Vincent Militek in 1985, the Massachusetts Office of Children issued an order to close the center, which was then called the Behavioral Research Institute, the BRI. The BRI countersued the Office of Children in seeing the institute's presentation of one of its worst self-harming residents. Judge Ernest Rotenberg sided with the BRI. In the settlement that followed, the Office for Children agreed to pay $580,000 to the BRI in legal fees. The head of the Office of Children later resigned and was sued by a group of parents for $15 million. He claimed that her attempt to shut down the center was a violation of their children's rights. The Behavioral Research Institute soon after changed its name to the Judge Rotenberg Center to honor the judge for his ruling. It's disgusting. I need a minute after this. Second attempt. In the 1990s, the Massachusetts Department of Mental Retardation launched a second attempt to shut down the center. A judge described the case as a war of harassment against Matthew Israel and ruled against the attempt to close the center and ordered the state to pay $1.5 million to the JRC in compensation for legal fees and other costs. Additionally, he stripped the agency of its power to regulate the center and awarded it to the courts, and the commissioner of the Department of Mental Retardation was forced to resign. Further attempts. Attempts to shut down or cripple the JRC at the legislative level have been made in every legislative session since the late 1980s. However, none have passed due to a combination of lobbying from the JRC and the protests of parents. At one time, a group of parents sued the state for $15 million, contending that the state's attempts to close the institute violated their children's rights to treatment. Treatment? The hell is wrong with people? Yes, it's important that you deprive my child from their ability to eat, to sleep. Hell is wrong with these people. It's like they're brainwashed and in a cult. Additionally, Massachusetts State Senator Jeffrey Sanchez, whose nephew Brandon has been detained in the JRC since 1992, is a major proponent of the JRC and their practices. Sanchez has repeatedly blocked passage of legislation that would threaten the center. Massachusetts State Senator Brian Joyce tried repeatedly during his tenure in office to shut down the center without success. If this same treatment were allowed on terrorists in Guantanamo Bay, there would be worldwide outrage. Brian Joyce. Brian Joyce left office in 2017. There have been repeated attempts to shut down the center by autism rights advocates, disability rights advocates, and human rights advocates. Though the people who've opposed the center, we've read through all of this before. Financials. It costs $275,000 per year to keep a resident at the JRC, which is paid for in tax dollars. Oh my God. The center advertises a near zero rejection rate. It said that it is a good fit for any team who is failing school, refusing to attend, or in psychiatric or correctional setting. The center has set out promotional materials to various institutions. It has had some success in picking up inmates from New York's juvenile jails and from Rikers Island. Some residents are sent there by the foster care system. As of 2017, the JRC had an annual revenue of $70 million. The JRC is incorporated as a tax-exempt non-for-profit organization. In 2020, it received $1.7 million in COVID-19 relief funds. Overbilling. In 2006, it was found that 14 of the school's 17 psychologists, including the director of psychology, lacked proper licenses. Because the state reimburses the JRC for services rendered by doctors, the JRC had overbilled the state by $800,000. As of 2008, the state had not collected the money. For misinterpreting license status of psychologists, the Board of Registration of Psychologists fined the JRC for $43,000 and Matthew Israel 29,600. Lobbying. The center regularly lobbies the government to prevent the passage of legislation that could threaten it. In 2010, it spent over $100,000 to lobby against the passage of a bill that would have made the use of electric shocks illegal. The center has also lobbied against bills that would have banned the use of restraints and other adversives in the Massachusetts schools. As of 2011, the JRC has spent over $1 million on lobbying efforts. In 2007, the JRC spent $2.8 million in legal fees. Advertising and promotion. In 2008, the JRC spent $390,000 on advertising and promotion. The JRC advertises psychiatric and juvenile justice conferences, where it attempts to get professionals to recommend the school to parents and guardians. It also places ads on the New York City radio. If a parent or guardian expresses an interest in this center, a JRC recruiter will contact them to provide gifts and promotional materials. They will also help the parents sue their school district into paying for the JRC's tuition and housing fees. In 2007, Matthew Israel was paid $321,000. I guess it pays to torture people. Making that much money off the suffering of... There are multiple lawsuits and many documents to go over, but that's going to give you a good start. You have more of a background to work with as we start going through this case and getting into both sides of the argument. Like I said, I want to be fair, but I also wanted to let you know that this center has killed children, that they receive millions of dollars over the years for the torture of autistic children, that they will literally provoke behaviors just so they can punish them. And if they don't happen to provoke those behaviors, they punish them anyway. This is what we are up against, folks. And they played the game too well. They have that juggernaut Autism Speaks, which breaks in more dough than even they do. I will be showing other videos, survivor stories. We'll be hearing more from Jennifer Masumba, as well as getting into the court documents as well, hearing the side of the parents who are in support of the center. I swear to God, they're in a cult. I swear to God. Hell. But you need to hear both sides to decide for yourself. I'm not trying to influence you. That's just how I feel about it. Anyways, that's all I got for this afternoon because Tammy's going to be on in a bit, and I want to make sure not to miss her talks. I do appreciate your time this afternoon, folks, and as always, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. Thank you. Bye.